This is Chris, Kale, and Andrew with your Peak Trainer 1 passive testing, all right? So I've beaten Andrew down and he's now lying on the floor, all right? Yes, he's dead. No, in actuality, what I do is once we look at the movement screens, you know, we see there are areas of failure either in the upper or the lower body. For example, if I'm in an overhead squat and I lean forward excessively, or my knees bow in, or I'm coming forward on my toes, I can say, okay, I can see that I'm leaning forward, therefore the upper body is something that I want to look at. You know, if we see something with the knees in the valgus, or coming forward on the toes, or whatever it may be, then I know that the lower body is going to be more of an issue. So we can look closer to see, you know, which muscles might be tight, or which muscles have a mobility problem, so we can start to address these things with specific drills, all right? So in this series, the first thing I'm going to look at are the ankles, okay, or dorsiflexion. In order to have full dorsiflexion, we need about 10 to 20 degrees past neutral, and neutral would be around 90 degrees. So let's look at Andrew. He's got about 0 degrees here, and he's got about 0 degrees or less on his left side. Okay, and the thing is, Andrew's a good mover, so he was still able to nail a rock bottom overhead squat. So that tells me as well that he moves very well and he compensates well within his range of motion. Okay, so that's a good thing. But if we increase his mobility, then we give him access to more power. Okay, so let's look at this. Now, as I raise Andrew's leg up here, I feel it's very stiff. Okay, he can get to about 80 degrees, but it's very, very gunky through that range of motion. So he doesn't necessarily have tight hamstrings, but they're stiff, meaning that he can move through the range of motion, but he doesn't necessarily do it very efficiently. All right, and that's the difference between a passive stretch where he maybe stops here and he just doesn't have that range of motion. In order to increase that, I would have him hold at the end range and just gradually increase that stretch over time. All right? When we're talking about a mobility problem where he can move through that range of motion, but it's just very stiff and feels like it's restricted, we want to do something like an active leg lower where we would have him just lift your leg up and down a couple times. This would be a mobility drill. Okay, so he's moving through that range of motion. We can cue him to engage his core by pressing his foot down into the other side. You know, he can press his hands into the ground and brace his abs. But again, it's a mobility drill, and this would be a corrective exercise for a mobility problem, whereas for a flexibility problem or just a total range of motion problem, I'm going to hold in a stretch or do PNF stretching or whatever it may be. So that's going to be the big difference. So for Andrew, again, I just think the feel here is just stiff. It's not necessarily like he doesn't, and it's not an abrupt just stop at an in range. So I know that mobility would be here, right? I'm going to do knee to chest. Secure his other leg. It's pretty good mobility here. External rotation, he should be around 90 degrees. He's about 70, so it's stiff. He lifts weights, so that's that's not significant. Internal rotation, he has very little. He should be at about 35 degrees. He's got maybe 15. He should be over here almost, and he's not. So that's something that I'm going to note. I'll also look at adduction, okay, which is not a problem. So let's compare that to the other side. And we always want to compare side to side because asymmetry is going to be one of the greatest causes of injury. So if one side is very flexible and the other side is not, then that's a red flag. If both sides are stiff, I would rather it be that way because at least we're symmetrical at that point. So now let's look at this side, just compare the feel from side to side. And again, it's about the same. Knee to chest is about the same. External rotation is much more limited to this side. So I would note this, okay, because this represents asymmetry. This is a true flexibility issue because, again, it's an abrupt in-range feel. So I'm going to make a note of that. Internal rotation is about the same. So now let's, adduction is about the same also. So let's come on to your stomach real quick. All right, for this particular one, I also like to just watch the movement actively first because we can see whether or not the pelvis is going to compensate. If you see the pelvis going into what is called anterior tilt, where it lifts up when he pulls his heel to his butt, we know that he's probably doing this in standing positions as well. So starting with your right side, moving slowly, pull your heel to your butt. So he lifts up about here. All right, so he can still move through that range of motion to about here. But we get compensation, as you can see, as I start to move this, his pelvis moves up. Okay, so this tells me that his true range of motion right now for this would be about here. okay, and this is a sprinter getting his heel to his butt, okay, or this is somebody, performing a deep split squat. So this is something that we would improve through a mobility drill because we're trying to get him to move through ranges of motion with his core turned on. So something like a half kneeling hip extension where I come into this position, maybe I have him hold on to something, tighten his core, and just mobilize this movement with core activation. All right, now let's compare that to the other side. All right, so flex your heel to your butt on the left side. And with the left side, he can come to about here. All right, so that's a fairly significant difference. And again, this is about his in range, and his pelvis starts to move about maybe halfway. So both sides are going to be restricted. I would just give a little bit more volume to this side. All right, we can also look at hip external and internal rotation. External being this way on this side, so it's fairly restricted but not significant. Internal being here. Look at external here. Again, it's internal here. So, in my opinion, it's not that bad. I think the heel to the butt and external rotation in his right side is what I would prioritize in terms of stretching and mobilization. But now let's look at his upper body. Let's get you on your back again. All right, so now the two mobilizations we want to look at, the two tests that we want to do here are prone shoulder flexion. All right, so now we've eliminated gravity. So he's not fighting vertical orientation where he's getting his arms up to the wall. We just want to see if he can do it passively. Move forward just a little bit this way. Okay. Now bend your knees. Pressure back into the ground. Raise your arms up. Now let your arms, put your thumbs up. Now let your arms pressure back into the ground. Let your arms just drop behind you. Okay, and as you can see, Andrew is extremely stiff because when he tightens his core, he just stops, right? His arms should be able to get flush against the floor, but they can't because he just lacks that length, all right? Particularly in his left side, we can see that this arm is just a little bit lower than the other side, all right? So now, show them what happens when you arch your back, all right? Well, he gets down a little farther, I was like nothing, but he actually gets down a little bit farther. Okay, so he can compensate and get that range of motion from somewhere, but with all of these drills, we want to cue them with core activation. All right, so we know that he's stiff there, right? So his lats are something that we would prioritize, and that's really it's not something new because Andrew lifts heavy weights, but at the same time, we know that that's an area to look at. Now, let's look at his shoulder external internal rotation. All right, so what I'm going to do, and I'll do it on this side so people can see me here, I'm going to pin Andrew's shoulder down because what we'll see with the shoulder as well is that we can get all the way down, but his shoulder moves way forward in order to compensate to do that. So the body's going to get motion from somewhere. So I'm going to anchor his shoulder down, and I'm just going to stop when I start to feel resistance, which for him is about here. Right? He should be able to get all the way to the floor or about here. So, and if that's 90 degrees of motion, he's got about maybe 20. I'm going to look at external rotation and neutral, which he has. That's no problem. And again, I'm feeling resistance right about here. So that's where I'm stopped. I'm stopping it. Now let's compare that side to side. All right, so I'm going to look here, anchor his shoulder down, press down. He's right about here. So again, that's fairly consistent. And I'll look at the other side. He's good there. So in summary, if Andrew is somebody that, if I'm looking to do correctives for Andrew, all right, or give him specific mobilizations and stretching. We're going to look at right hip external rotation, heel to butt, and supine shoulder flexion, where I just cue him to line your back, raise your arms up, press your back into the ground, tighten your abs. Let your arms just drop behind you as much as you can, slowly. All right, now move it up, slowly behind you. Come back up. Good. So just something like that where he's moving throughout ranges of motion along with stretching. All right. So those are our mobility, or those are our tests. Enjoy.